Did you know that the Christian fundamentalists have found evidence for Noah's Ark? Not just once, but twice. Well, stay tuned while we take a look and see if this is based on anything in the land of reason at all. Believe it or not, Christian fundamentalists and evangelical cult members are still claiming that they have evidence for Noah's Ark, and the claim is for the Ark itself. Never mind all the massive geological evidence that clearly states there was never a great flood. They revert yet to another proof and discovery, which isn't a proof or discovery at all. Researched by their own and claimed by their own, and no one else. Now, I remember hearing this claim before from my once evangelical friend that they found the Ark, Noah's Ark, right up there on Mount Ararat. And this would have been in the early 90s. But then I heard it again from my Christian fundamentalist neighbors in 2010. More conclusive proof of the findings of the Ark, and about 10 minutes of research on the internet completely debunked this. So now, well over a decade later, I re-researched the debunking and put it into a video. This has largely faded away over the last decade, as more and more evidence surfaces that clearly debunk that they have found the remains of Noah's Ark, but yet there are still many Christian fundamentalists that hold on to these claims. The first one is an old tale of the rock formation that the evangelical was stating was the remains of Noah's Ark itself, the actual ship, located near Mount Ararat in Turkey. It's the Durapinar site, named after the Turkish captain, identified in 1948 from an Air Force aerial photo. And yes, it does look like a ship. But this site was actually surveyed in 1960, and there were no archaeological remains found. The only remains were soil and rock. But the Christian evangelical or fundamentalist will immediately state, are you trying to tell us that something is shaped exactly like a ship could have been randomly caused by the forces of nature? Of course I'm telling you that. I can think of 3 rock sculptures off the top of my head that are highly unusual. One is the Devil's Post pile located on the John Muir Trail in California. It literally looks like petrified beams of wood stacked like you'd see on a construction site, where all the edges are absolutely smooth, resembling wooden beams. The second is the monkey face in the Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. It totally resembles the face of a monkey, yet I don't think that meant there was a monkey god that planted it there. And the third is the Eagle Rock on the Pacific Crest Trail in California. Even up close, it absolutely looks like an eagle with spread wings about ready to take off. Should I believe that an eagle god ruled the terrain? There are countless numbers of strange rock sculptures on this earth, but yet you find one that resembles a ship, and it must be Noah's Ark. But you would think the 1960 survey was conclusive enough, but no, in 1985 a few fundamentalists pursued it further. Ron Wyatt, John Baumgartner, and David Fasalt visited the site to investigate. And it's interesting because if you research these claims long enough, the same names keep popping up. I noted John Baumgartner in a prior video with his ridiculous theory called runaway subduction, where he attempts to explain how continents moved across the sea in a matter of 40 days. And yes, he is a geophysicist. He was a geophysicist whose theory was debunked by every other single scientist on Earth, minus the evangelicals and Institute for Creation Research. Then you have Ron Wyatt, who not only was fortunate enough to find Noah's Ark, but also the Ark of the Covenant, chariot wheels from the Egyptian army at the bottom of the Red Sea, confirming the story of Moses and Exodus, and the actual remains of the blood of Christ himself. Never mind that every single one of his claims have been thoroughly debunked by modern archaeologists, and that absolutely nothing he has claimed has been backed by any sort of evidence whatsoever. I'm sure his findings on the so-called Noah's Ark site will be legitimate. And then another man named David Fasalt. Haven't heard of him until now, but apparently he used groundbreaking radar and came to the conclusion that it showed internal rooms inside the sculpture, resembling Noah's Ark. However, it was noted later by Andrew Snelling, a creationist commentator, that the gadget he used was actually something you would find in a treasure hunting magazine, and that he conducted his investigation with no scientific method whatsoever. The drogue stones that he found, stones with a hole at the top of them, that he believed were stabilizers that kept the ship balanced during the flood, were researched by geologists and found that they did not come from the Mesopotamia area at all. And finally, years later, Mr. Fasalt retracted his claims that the Noah's Ark site was legitimate. This has been thoroughly debunked as nothing more than a rock formation, period, the end, period. But yet the fundamentalists will still hang on to it, many of them. And the second piece of so-called research that confirms that Noah's Ark was up there in the mountains, finally laid to rest after the Great Flood, came from the Noah's Ark Ministries International team out of Hong Kong, which is interestingly an offshoot of a Hong Kong corporation that's involved in making Christian ministry films. These were Chinese and Turkish evangelicals. Shocker. They claim to have gone up and found large rooms made of wooden beams, which they radiocarbon dated and placed the time period approximately 4,800 years ago. Well, first of all, there's 3 points that completely kill that theory. 1, there's no geological evidence at all that says there was a great flood in that area, period, the end. 2, there's not enough water on the earth to get an ark that high. And 3, all the historical evidence we have shows that there was no disruption in Turkish culture of who was living there in that time whatsoever when the supposed massive flood would have stopped all culture altogether. But never mind that. Let's take a look at Dr. Randall Price, who left the team because he severely questioned their honesty to begin with. Let's look at the fact that they kept the location of this supposed site a secret from everyone. They stated the wood was radiocarbon tested in a university in Tehran, but they wouldn't state which one. They would not present their so-called evidence to be reviewed by anyone else. And do you know why? Because the whole thing was a complete fraud. There are even many creationist think tanks that are stating this is a fraud. This site has not been presented to the public for thorough investigation to conclude whether it's true or not. We're just supposed to take their word for it, which they say they believe with 99.9% accuracy that this is the site of Noah's Ark. And here's my endpoint to this, and this is why I call most Christian fundamentalists nothing more than cult members. You read an article from the Institute for Creation Research or one of your other fundamentalist apologists, and you immediately just assume it's true. You don't fact check it, you don't research it, you don't listen to others who've researched it, all under the guise of everyone's against Christians. Well, they're not against Christians. How many years did they research the Shroud of Turin? And for a brief time, some of those scientists began to think it really was the Shroud of Jesus Christ, until it was finally proved that the age of the shroud didn't match the time during the crucifixion by hundreds of years. It has now been shown there is no evidence that Noah's Ark was up there on Mount Ararat or anywhere near it. Not only has that been shown, but the 2 attempts I just displayed, which are the ones you commonly use to try to prove your worldview, have been completely debunked. We know for a fact that neither of those claims hold water now, but yet you keep propagating it, because this is a sort of absolute pseudoscience garbage research that you use in your continued attempt to prove that Genesis was legitimate, when all accounts, scientific and historical, clearly show that it wasn't. And as far as this claim of you having discovered the Noah's Ark site and attempting to back it with so-called evidence, you have not only failed once again, but in such a manner that you'll be the target of ridicule once more. Now, if you'd like to engage in a tale that also doesn't have any evidence, check out my novel The Second Fall, an offbeat Armageddon sure to offend the evangelical. Links on Amazon in the video description as well as the banner, and I will see you next time as we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.